What would Jesus do? This is an introduction to a new series I want to do for the videos called What Would Jesus Do Under Certain Circumstances and Situations. And so I want to share it and introduce how this came about in my thought life. I was up in Connecticut just recently visiting my family and my grandchild, and also I had some business to do. And while I was sitting down doing some of the business, I was speaking to a man who had recently had a crisis in his life and really needed a miracle to be able to walk again. And so I was sharing a little bit about a convention that I had just recently gone to, and ministering at that convention was the great-great-granddaughter of a man by the name of Smith Wigglesworth. And I told him about Smith Wigglesworth. He was the apostle of faith, called the apostle of faith back in the 1920s and 30s, a man that had phenomenal faith in the Word of God and the promises of God, particularly regarding healing. And there had been many incurable diseases and even people that had been raised from the dead that were documented as dead by doctors and that he had raised from the dead. And of course, this man was looking at me a little bit. He hadn't heard too much of anything like that before, if any, ever heard anything like that. And I was really trying to let this man know that there is a God that can heal and deliver you from and rescue you and do the impossible from our perspective. But I was telling him, I said, now this particular man of God was quite a different personality because there was a harshness sometimes to him. People sometimes would come up into the prayer line and to be prayed for, and like for instance, one time a man had come up who had been prayed for the day before, and he had prayed the prayer of faith, but the man now comes back up because he didn't believe, and Brother Wigglesworth sometimes was prone to just go ahead and kick him. He says, "Get off this platform. I prayed for you last year or last week or yesterday, and you're not believing God. Get off here. I'm not going to pray for you again." And the man chuckled and he said, "That's not what Jesus would do." And I paused and I looked at him and I said, "Well, how do you know that that's a fact?" I said, "How do you know what Jesus would do?" I said, "One thing I know that Jesus did do, because this man didn't heal these sick people. This man didn't raise those people from the dead. It was the Lord that healed these people." And I said, God stood right with him on that platform, and he didn't get offended by his harshness at that time. He continued to heal people through that man's ministry and that man's faith. And he kind of looked at me kind of shocked a little bit. And it led me to say, people do need to understand we've got to put Jesus out of the box. A lot of people have just confined Jesus to their interpretation of how Jesus would be. Mild-mannered, gentle, easygoing, never offensive, never controversial, never a harsh word, never a strong word, anything like that. Well, folks, we need to understand that Jesus was the Word of God made flesh. And if you really want to know what Jesus would do, take Jesus out of your box and begin to realize what Jesus did in the past, since the very beginning of mankind, right on to what he said he's going to do into the second coming of Christ and into the millennial reign and eventually into the eternal state. And so I believe we can answer that question, what would Jesus do? I know our children, sometimes they wear this wristband, WWJD, just to kind of remind them, and we basically use it to a good cause. Don't lose your temper, don't get angry, don't get foul-mouthed, don't misbehave, and we leave it on that setting. But there are many things and many circumstances that we need to consider what Jesus would do. And so I believe that this series is going to be a help to you if you'll tune in and pay attention to him. You have a great day. God bless.